Whatever you are holding right now, set it down. Not in a moment. Now. Because what is moving through the sky in the next 24 hours does not wait for convenient timing, and neither does this. By this time tomorrow, March 24th, a Friday, Mars will lock onto the north node of destiny at exactly 8 degrees and 55 minutes of Pisces. The separation between them, 19 arc minutes. In the language of the sky, that is not close. That is contact. That is a blade finding the exact groove it was forged to fit. The last time this conjunction formed at this precise degree of Pisces, the year was 1840. Your great-great-great-grandparents were alive. The industrial world was just learning what fire could build. Whatever was seated at that degree, whatever motion was set into the bones of history at that configuration, it has been lying dormant in the dark for 180 years. Tomorrow, it opens its eyes. Understand what Mars actually is before you dismiss this as astronomy. Every civilization that watched the sky and dared to give this planet a name arrived at the same understanding. Not a rock, not a light, the will that moves, the force that decides, the hammer that does not ask permission before it falls. And the North Node, that invisible point where your personal timeline intersects with something much older than your plans, is the anvil. The forge does not operate on sentiment. It operates on temperature and timing. Strike too early, and the metal holds its old shape, rigid, resistant, unable to receive what the blow was meant to give it. Strike too late, and the heat is gone. The moment is past, and what could have been made is lost to cooling air. But strike at the precise moment of readiness, when the metal is neither too raw nor too hardened, and everything bends. One strike, one irreversible new shape. That is what tomorrow is. The strike point, not the beginning of a consideration, not a nudge toward reflection. A strike point. The moment the sky selects to ask you the one question it has been withholding until now, and the question is not soft. It does not arrive with warmth or reassurance or the comfort of more time. It arrives the way a hammer arrives, with weight, with direction, with the full authority of something that has been waiting 180 years to land. What are you going to decide when it falls? Not what you have been hoping to decide, not the answer you have been rehearsing in the quiet of 3 a.m. when no one else can hear. The decision that carries your name, the one that changes the weight of the air around you the moment it leaves your mouth. That decision is what this is about. And the window is already narrowing. Stay with me. By the time this is finished, you will not need to search for the decision. You will recognize it, because some part of you has been circling it for months, maybe longer, and your body has known what your mind has been too careful to say out loud. Before I tell you what the sky is doing tomorrow, let me tell you what the Romans understood about a moment exactly like this one. In the centuries before calendars were printed and fate was something you tracked on a screen, Rome had a god whose name you already know, Mars. But the Mars they built temples to was not only the god of war and blood and the clash of iron on iron. He had an older face, a quieter one. They called it Gradavis the Strider, the one who marches forth, not the one who wins, the one who moves. And before a Roman legion could pass through the city gates, before a single sandal pressed into foreign soil, every soldier was required to stand in the shadow of his temple at the Porta Capena and swear the sacramentum, an oath, not to victory, not to survival, to the irreversible act of forward motion. The oath was this: I will take the first step, and I will not reverse it. What makes that oath remarkable is not the words, it is the timing. It was sworn before the danger was real, before the cost had a face, before the body had any reason to be afraid except that it could see the road stretching out and could not see where the road ended. The entire weight of everything that followed every battle, every sacrifice, every mile, rested on that single declaration, spoken aloud, in public, while the soldier was still standing on safe ground. That is precisely what the sky is asking of you tomorrow, not on a field outside Rome, in your kitchen, in your car. Mars at 8 degrees, 55 minutes of Pisces is not summoning you to fight. It is summoning you to name the direction you are walking and to say it where your own ears can hear it, even if what lies ahead is fog, especially if it is. Because this conjunction is not happening in a fire sign or an earth sign, it is happening in Pisces, and Pisces does not hand you a lit road and a clear destination. Pisces hands you a feeling, a pull, the faintest luminescence on the horizon that asks you, demands of you to trust it before you can prove it. Mars in this sign is not the general surveying the map. Mars in Pisces is the soldier who already folded the map, tucked it away, and started walking toward the glow. That is a different kind of courage. Harder, in many ways, than the kind that comes with certainty. Mars entered Pisces earlier this month and remains there until April 9th. The warrior walked into the ocean not to drown, not to be softened into something harmless, but to learn the strength that does not make noise. Picture a river at the point where it bends. The surface flattens. The current seems to ease. A casual observer would call it calm. But beneath that stillness, the water is moving at its greatest force. That is exactly where the bank erodes fastest, where the landscape is quietly, permanently rewritten. Mars in Pisces is that bend. The force does not announce itself. The action does not look like action, but it cuts deeper than anything loud ever could. If your drive has gone quiet these past 10 days, if the urgency you usually carry has been replaced by something slower, something that feels uncomfortably like waiting, do not mistake that for weakness. The river is not weak at the bend. The river is doing its most decisive work in precisely the place it appears to have slowed. And at 8 degrees 55 minutes of that river, Mars meets the North Node, the anvil, the point in space where the future is not predicted, where it is forged, not the future your anxiety rehearses at 3 a.m., not the future someone handed you with their expectations wrapped around it like wire, the future your soul committed to before you had a name for any of this. That future is 1 day away. Most readings will stop at the conjunction. They will hand you the date, mark the degree, and move on. What they will not tell you is that tomorrow is not a single event. It is the second strike in a sequence of 3. And when you see the full pattern, when you understand what landed 2 days ago, what lands tomorrow, and what arrives 2 days after that, the weight of this 5-day window becomes impossible to ignore. 3 strikes, 1 anvil. The first strike landed on March 11th. That was the day Jupiter stationed direct in Cancer after 5 months of retrograde, 5 months of pulling inward, reviewing, reconsidering, holding its breath in the deep chambers of your emotional life. Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, the planet that governs not just expansion, but the specific courage required to believe that what comes next can be better than what came before. Not blind optimism, not wishful thinking. The earned, bone-deep faith that grows only in people who have sat in the dark long enough to know the difference between a dead end and a tunnel. For 5 months, that faith was being compressed, tested. On March 11th, it exhaled. You may have felt it as something physical, a loosening in the sternum, a breath that went slightly deeper than the ones before it, a sense that something which had been pressing against you from the inside simply stepped back, not gone, repositioned, making room. That was Jupiter releasing what it had been holding since October, not handing it to you all at once, but opening the valve, allowing the pressure to begin its slow, deliberate movement toward the surface. That was the first strike, the one that prepared the metal. The second strike lands tomorrow. Mars on the North Node. This is the strike that shapes everything Jupiter loosened 2 days ago, every belief about what you deserve, every dormant courage, every truth that has been fermenting in the dark since autumn. All of it now meets the raw, directed force of Mars and the precise magnetic pull of the node. The two forces that govern will and destiny, meeting at the same point, at the same moment, with nowhere to deflect and nothing left to soften the contact. The decision stops being theoretical tomorrow. It becomes physical. You will feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not as a thought, not as an emotion, exactly, but as something that moves through the body before the mind has finished forming a sentence about it. Some of you will feel it in your hands, a warmth, a restlessness, a readiness that has no immediate object. Your hands will know before your words do. That is the second strike. The one that bends. The third strike arrives on March 26th. That is the day Mercury retrograde, still moving backward through Pisces, still retracing the rooms of your inner architecture, catches up to Mars at the same degree where the hammer just fell. And what Mercury does there is something the other planets cannot do. Mercury is the mind, the word, the signature at the bottom of the oath. When it arrives at the point where Mars already struck, it does not undo the shape. You cannot unring a bell. The metal has already moved. But Mercury retrograde meeting Mars at that degree asks you to return to the moment of impact, not to reverse it, but to read it, to hear, more clearly than you could in the heat of the strike itself, what your own voice was actually saying when it committed. Because decisions made under Mars carry force before they carry understanding. The body acts, the will moves, and only afterward, sometimes days afterward, does the mind arrive and begin to comprehend the full weight of what it agreed to. Mercury on March 26th is that arrival. The moment the inscription on the metal becomes legible, the moment you understand not just what you decided, but why and what it is going to cost, and what it is going to free. 3 strikes, 5 days. The first one opened you. The second one shapes you. The third one shows you what was made. This is not a sequence you can opt out of by not paying attention. The forge does not require your awareness to do its work, but the difference between being shaped consciously and being shaped in the dark is the difference between a life you built and a life that simply happened to you. You are already inside this window. The question is whether you are watching it or working it. Jupiter opened the door. Mars walks through it. Mercury records what changed. From the outside, you would call this orchestration. A sequence too precise to be accidental, too layered to be coincidence. From the inside, which is exactly where you are standing, you would call it something simpler and more unsettling. The most deliberately aimed 5 days you have lived through in years. But pull your attention away from the sky for a moment. Bring it here. Into the room you are sitting in. Into the body you have been carrying through these last several days without fully understanding why it feels different. Because your body has not been waiting for this video to tell it something is coming. Your body already knows. It has been signaling you in the only language it has: sensation, rhythm, disruption. And if you have been paying even partial attention, you have already felt at least one of these 4 things. The first is your hands. In the last few days, have your palms carried a heat that has no physical explanation? Not the warmth of exertion, not fever. Something quieter, a low-grade aliveness in the fingertips, a restlessness that makes your hands feel like they are waiting to reach for something they cannot yet name. That is not random circulation. The hands are the body's instruments of decision. They sign what the mind commits to. They open doors, they reach toward people, or they release them. They do the actual physical work of every choice you have ever made. And right now, they are warming the way metal warms before it is ready to be worked, because something beneath your conscious thought already knows a choice is close. Already knows the forge is hot. The second is your sleep. Have you been waking before dawn? Somewhere around 4, maybe 5 in the morning, not gradually, not groggily, but suddenly and completely, as if your name was called in an empty room, fully alert, eyes open, heart already moving at a pace that belongs to noon, not pre-dawn, no sound, no reason, just the electric certainty of being awake in a way that feels almost like a summons. That is your nervous system doing what animal nervous systems have always done before a decisive shift arrives. It does not need a date on a calendar. It reads the field, and the field has been changing for days. The third sign is a face. Someone you have not thought about in months, maybe years, has surfaced without warning. In a dream that left a residue you could not shake by morning. In the middle of an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, their face simply appeared. You heard something close to their voice, and something in your chest responded with a tightening that told you, before you could reason your way around it, that there is unfinished weight between you and that person. something that was never fully closed. The North Node does not deal in nostalgia. It does not surface old faces to torment you with what was lost. It surfaces them because a decision was left half-made, a circuit that was never completed, and the node, approaching its conjunction with Mars, is pulling every open circuit toward resolution. That face is not a ghost. It is unfinished business that the sky has decided can no longer wait. The fourth sign is your breathing, a strange, unresolved rhythm in your chest these last few days. One breath opens wide, fills completely, carries an almost unexpected sense of spaciousness. The next tightens before it finishes, as if your lungs cannot settle on which world they belong to, the one you have been living in or the one you are moving toward. You are not anxious in any clinical sense. You are oscillating. Your body is suspended between two gravitational fields, swinging in the space between the life behind you and the life the next 5 days are pulling you into. And it has not yet found its landing point. 3. That oscillation is not weakness. It is the bellows of the forge. It is the breath that feeds the fire before the hammer falls. These 4 signals, the warming hands, the pre-dawn waking, the returning face, the unsteady breath, do not share a medical explanation. They share an origin. They are the body's method of positioning itself before a decisive moment arrives. The way a musician's fingers find their place on the instrument before the first note is played. Preparation that happens below the level of intention. Your body has been standing in front of the anvil for days. It already knows what your mind has been too careful to say out loud. The only question left is whether your mind is ready to catch up. Understand something about the hammer before it falls. It does not choose for you. It never has. The forge amplifies what you bring to it, the clarity or the confusion, the honesty or the story you have been rehearsing instead of honesty. What emerges from tomorrow is not determined by the sky. It is determined by what you are willing to place on the anvil when the moment arrives. So let me ask you something you have probably been avoiding. You already know what the decision is. Not approximately, not in the vague, unformed way of someone still gathering information. You know. You have known for weeks, possibly months, possibly so long that you have stopped registering it as a decision at all and started treating it as a condition, something permanent, something you simply live around, like a wall you stop noticing because you learned the exact angle to turn your shoulder when you pass it. The question this conjunction is asking is not what should I do? The question is, why haven't you done it yet? And the answer, if you are honest, if you are willing to sit with it for more than the 3 seconds it takes to generate a reasonable sounding deflection, is almost never a lack of information. It is almost never that you need more time to think. More time to think is what you told yourself 6 months ago. The thinking is done. What remains is something else entirely. What remains is the story, the one you have been telling yourself in the responsible, measured voice that sounds like wisdom but functions like a wall. You called it patience. And maybe in the beginning it was, but patience has a natural lifespan, and yours expired quietly, somewhere in the middle of last year. And you kept using the word anyway because it was more comfortable than admitting that what you were actually practicing was avoidance with better posture. You called it keeping the peace, but the peace you have been keeping is not peace. It is silence that is still breathing. Silence with a pulse, and that pulse has been getting louder in the hours before sleep, in the pause before you answer certain questions, in the way your body tightens slightly whenever the subject edges too close to the surface. Mars on the North Node does not negotiate with that silence. This conjunction is a forge, and a forge has one function: to burn away everything that is not essential until only the true material remains. The soft excuses, the quiet deals you made with yourself at 2 a.m. when no one else was listening, when you promised yourself eventually, when you said, not yet, not today, soon. The forge does not have a category for eventually. It does not recognize soon. It recognizes only the temperature of now and the question of what you are actually made of when the heat is applied. But here is where this transit becomes something more nuanced than a simple demand for action. Because Mars alone, Mars in Aries, Mars in Capricorn, Mars moving through fire or earth would simply point at the wall and tell you to break through it. Charge, strike, move. That is the Mars most people know. But this is Mars in Pisces, and Pisces does not issue that order. Pisces asks a different question, a harder one, in many ways, because it cannot be answered with momentum alone. It cannot be satisfied by simply moving faster or pushing harder or finally doing the thing you have been postponing. The question Mars in Pisces asks is not what are you willing to fight for. It is what are you willing to release so the right thing can finally grow. That distinction is everything. Every gardener who has worked the soil long enough knows that March is the month of the blade. Not the month of planting that comes after, before a single bud can open, before the new season has any chance of becoming what it is capable of becoming. The deadwood must be removed. Not torn away in frustration. Not ripped out in a moment of rage that mistakes destruction for decisiveness. Cut, cleanly, deliberately, with the specific grief that belongs to the act of cutting something that was once alive and green and full of promise, because some of those branches did carry leaves last summer, and you remember exactly how they looked in the light, and the remembering makes the blade heavier. But a branch that no longer bears fruit does not simply go dormant. It does not rest peacefully while the rest of the tree continues its work. It drains, quietly, continuously. It pulls nutrients from the limbs that are still producing, still reaching, still capable of something the dead branch can no longer offer. And the longer the blade is withheld out of sentiment, out of hope, out of the specific exhaustion that comes from making the same assessment and arriving at the same conclusion and still not acting on it, the weaker the whole tree becomes. You have a branch like that. You may have more than one. But there is one in particular that your body already identified the moment I said it. Something in you went still with recognition. A relationship that has been withdrawing more than it deposits, for longer than you have been willing to formally acknowledge. A role you have been performing past the point where it bore any resemblance to who you actually are. A version of yourself you keep maintaining, keep feeding, keep defending, keep explaining, even though it stopped being true years ago, and you have known it and kept going anyway, because dismantling it requires a conversation you have not been ready to have. Mars brings the blade. Pisces tells you which branch, and the north node, that fixed, patient, inexorable point where your future is being forged, tells you with absolute clarity that the tree cannot reach its next season until the cut is made, not eventually. Now, step back for a moment. Widen the frame, because this decision is not arriving in a vacuum. It is not an isolated strike in an otherwise quiet sky. What Mars is demanding of you tomorrow is the direct consequence of something that was set into motion 3 weeks ago, something that rearranged the ground beneath every life on this planet before most people had the language to describe what they were feeling. On February 20th, Saturn and Neptune met in exact conjunction at 0 degrees and 45 minutes of Aries, the world point, the first breath of the entire zodiac, the degree where every cycle begins. This conjunction does not happen casually. It assembles itself once every 36 years, and the last time it did, the year was 1989. You remember what 1989 meant, even if you were not yet alive to witness it. Walls fell. Borders that had been fixed for decades dissolved overnight. Maps that entire generations had memorized as permanent were redrawn before the ink was dry. What Saturn and Neptune do when they meet is not subtle, and it is not metaphorical. They are the two forces that govern what is real and what is possible, structure and dissolution, the concrete and the invisible, the world as it has been built and the world as it insists on becoming. When they conjoin, the boundary between those two things stops holding. What they dissolved on February 20th was the floor you had been standing on, not your life. The assumptions beneath your life. The invisible architecture of rules and patterns and quiet certainties that you had stopped questioning because they had been load-bearing for so long. They felt like geology, the sense that the structure you built was permanent, that what worked before would continue to work, that the ground, whatever else happened, would remain ground. You felt it, even if you never found the words for it. Somewhere in the last weeks of February, Something shifted in a way that did not announce itself cleanly. You walked into a room you recognized and something was wrong, not visibly wrong, not dramatically wrong, but wrong in the way a room feels when the furniture has been moved in the dark. Everything is still there, but nothing is exactly where you left it, and the map you had been navigating by no longer matches the territory. That disorientation is not confusion. It is accuracy. It is your nervous system correctly registering that the old coordinates no longer apply. This is why the decision Mars is pressing toward tomorrow feels different from other decisions. More exposed, more vertiginous, less supported by the familiar scaffolding of how things are supposed to work. You are not choosing on ground you have stood on before. You are choosing on ground that is still forming, still settling into whatever it is becoming beneath your feet. Ground that has not yet hardened into certainty. And that is precisely why the choice matters as much as it does. The first decision made on new ground does not just respond to the terrain. It shapes it. It becomes the foundation. It tells the earth beneath you what kind of weight it will be asked to carry, what kind of structure it needs to prepare itself to hold. What you decide in the next 5 days is not simply a response to your circumstances. It is the first load-bearing beam of the next chapter of your life. Now let me bring this closer into your chart. If you were born under Pisces or carry Pisces rising, tomorrow's conjunction falls in your first house, the house of identity, of the self that faces the world. Mars is not asking you to make a decision about something external. It is asking you to decide who you are going to be from this point forward. The version of yourself that has been running the show, the one that formed under old conditions, that learned its shape from other people's expectations and ancient survival strategies, is being called to the anvil. What emerges from this forge will be leaner, truer, and deeply unfamiliar to everyone who only knew the previous form. Let them be surprised. If you were born under Virgo or carry Virgo rising, this lands in your 7th house, the house of partnership, of the other person. Mars is not forging a question about whether you love them. That question is too simple for what this conjunction is actually asking. The real question is whether the structure you have built together, the agreements, spoken and unspoken, the roles each of you has been playing, the weight each of you has been carrying for the other, can hold the person you are in the process of becoming. The answer will not be comfortable. But after tomorrow, it will be clear in a way it has not been before. If you were born under Gemini or carry Gemini rising, this conjunction strikes your 10th house career, public identity. The face the world has learned to recognize as yours. Something in your professional life is being shaped by this transit, and the question it is asking cuts through every practical consideration straight to the essential one. The work you do and the work you were born to do, are they still the same thing? If they have drifted apart, if a gap has been quietly widening between what you produce and what you are actually here to build, you will feel that distance become undeniable this week. If you were born under Sagittarius or carry Sagittarius rising, the conjunction falls in your 4th house, the foundation beneath the foundation. Home, not the address, not the structure, but the feeling, the place where the self is allowed to be unguarded. Mars is arriving at the most private room in your chart and asking the question you have been most careful to avoid. What you call home and what actually holds you, what actually restores you, what makes you feel like you are allowed to exist without performing. These may no longer be the same place. And Mars is done allowing that gap to go unnamed. Here is what you are going to do with this. Not a visualization, not a breathing exercise, not a journaling prompt dressed in spiritual language, a physical act, a sequence of 5 deliberate movements mapped precisely to the 5 days the sky is moving through, because the sky is not speaking in metaphor right now, and neither is this. 5 days. 5 actions. 1 unbroken arc from declaration to confirmation. March 24th. The day the hammer falls. After sundown, find a single candle and a piece of paper no larger than your open hand, something you can fold completely, something that fits in a closed fist. That scale is intentional. What you are about to write is not a document. It is not a plan. It is a seed. And seeds do not require space. They require darkness and pressure and time. Light the candle. Then, sit with it. Do not reach for the pen immediately. This is not the moment for words yet. Watch the flame find its shape, that brief, unstable flickering as it draws the first oxygen into itself, and then the steadying, the moment it commits to burning. Wait for that. Wait until the flame is no longer deciding whether to exist and has simply accepted that it does. When your breath slows to match that steadiness, and you will feel it, the moment your chest stops bracing and simply opens, pick up the pen. Write one sentence, only one. Begin it with these words: I am deciding to. Then finish it with whatever your hand produces before your mind can edit it into something more presentable. Do not reach for nobility. Do not arrange it into courage. Do not soften the edges to make it easier to look at. Write what is true in the unguarded version of your voice, the one that speaks at 3 a.m. when the performance has gone to sleep and only the actual thing remains. That sentence is your sacramentum, your oath before the march. Fold the paper once, place it beneath the candle. Let the flame burn for at least 7 minutes, one for each of the classical planets, one for each force that has been building toward this moment. Then, blow it out with intention. Not casually. The way you close a door you mean to close. The decision is now in the room with you. It has left the interior. It has crossed from thought into the physical world, and the physical world has received it. It has a body now. It has weight. The candle smoke carries it upward. The folded paper holds it down. Between those two directions, something has been anchored. March 25th, the day of silence. Tell no one, not your closest friend, not the person you process everything with, not even in the form of a hint, a leading question, a conversation steered carefully toward the edge of what you wrote last night. The metal that was struck yesterday is still cooling, still finding its final form, and sound at this stage, other people's reactions, their concerns, their well-meaning questions creates vibration in the cooling structure. Vibration weakens the form before it has fully hardened. This is not secrecy for its own sake. This is the specific discipline of allowing a decision to become solid before you expose it to the pressure of other people's responses. Most decisions that should have held were dissolved, not by external force, but by premature speech, by the decision maker, seeking validation before the decision had finished becoming itself. Carry it in the quiet. Let it harden, undisturbed. If the urge to speak becomes almost unbearable, and for some of you it will, because the decision is significant enough that containing it feels like pressure, to understand that the pressure you are feeling is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is real. Small decisions do not create that kind of interior weight. Only the ones that matter do. Carry the weight. One day, let the metal cool. March 26th. Mercury retrograde meets Mars at the same degree where the hammer fell. Today you speak it out loud, alone. Find a place where your voice can travel without immediately meeting another person's ears. A room with bare walls that give the sound back to you cleanly. A car with the windows sealed and the engine off. A patch of open ground where the nearest witness is a tree. The specific location matters less than the condition you need to be able to hear yourself the way a stranger would hear you. Without the interior softening that happens when words stay inside the skull. Stand. Do not sit for this. The body that swears an oath stands. Say the full sentence you wrote 2 nights ago by candlelight. Not in a whisper. A whisper is still a form of concealment. In your speaking voice. The one you use when you mean to be heard. And then, before you analyze what you said, before the mind begins its commentary, notice what happened in your body the moment the words left your mouth. Something will shift. It may be a loosening, a sudden release of something you did not realize you had been holding. It may be a tightening, a sharp clarity about the weight of what you have just committed to. It may be something that has no name yet, a sensation that belongs entirely to this particular crossing. Whatever it is, do not explain it away. Do not rationalize it into something manageable. Simply register it. The body's response to a spoken oath is data. It is Mercury arriving at the inscription on the metal and beginning to read. This is the moment the decision develops a voice. Last night it had weight. Tonight it has sound. It is becoming real in a different dimension, not just anchored in the physical world, but moving through it, carried now on air, in vibration, in the specific frequency of your own voice saying the true thing. March 27th and 28th. Mercury crosses the North Node. Do nothing. This is the instruction that will be hardest to follow, not because it requires effort, but because after days of deliberate action, stillness feels like abandonment, like you have stopped tending something that needs tending. You have not. This is the watching, and the watching is its own discipline. In these 2 days, as Mercury passes over the exact point where Mars struck the anvil, the outer world will begin to respond to the inner declaration you have made. Not with the obvious symbolism of a door swinging open in a film. The responses will arrive in the register of ordinary life, which is the only register that matters, because that is the register you actually live in. A conversation will find its way to you that you did not initiate. Someone will say something casually, without knowing what they are doing, that lands directly on the center of what you wrote by candlelight on the 24th. A door will close that you had been holding open out of habit, and you will feel, when it closes, not loss, but relief. Or a door will open that you had stopped believing was still there, and it will open quietly, without fanfare, the way things open when they have simply become ready. Watch for these. Do not force them. Do not manufacture them. The anvil is showing you the shape of what was forged, and what the forge produces is only visible once the metal has been lifted from the fire and allowed to cool in the open air. These 2 days are that opening. The shape is becoming visible. 5 days. 1 candle, 1 sentence written in the dark before the editing mind arrives. 1 day of silence while the form hardens. 1 spoken oath in an empty room where your own voice comes back to you, stripped of everything but its truth. And then 2 days of open, patient watching while the world begins to arrange itself around the decision you have made. This is not ceremony for its own sake. Every element of this sequence exists because the sky is moving through a specific progression, and this protocol moves through it with you, not as a spectator watching from a careful distance, but as someone who understood what was being asked and met it with their full weight. The forge does not reward observation. It rewards presence. You are already here. The candle is waiting. The paper is waiting. The sentence that has been forming in the back of your mind for longer than you want to admit, the one you keep almost saying and then folding back down into silence, is waiting. Tonight, after the sun goes down, you stop waiting too. Before you step into that sequence, understand what is actually at stake. Not just for you, for everyone standing in the radius of your stillness. Because a strike on the anvil does not stay contained to the workshop. The ring travels. It moves through walls, through silence, through the invisible distance between people who are connected by something older than language. The choice you make at 8 degrees, 55 minutes of Pisces does not end at the borders of your own life. It reaches the people who have been waiting without knowing they were waiting for you to move first. The friend who cannot find the nerve to choose honestly until they watch someone they trust choose honestly first. The person in your orbit who has been circling their own decision for months, held in place not by their own fear but by the unspoken signal that stillness is still acceptable here. The version of yourself that has been standing in the dark, with its arms folded and its jaw set, watching, unconvinced, waiting to see if you mean it this time. They are all waiting on the same answer. And here is the thing I need you to hear clearly, because most people misread this and it costs them years. You are not afraid of the decision. You have never been afraid of the decision. You know what it is. You have known for a long time. What you are afraid of, the real fear, the one underneath the reasonable explanations, is who you will have to become once it is made. Because the person who exists on the other side of this choice does not get to keep the comfortable old stories, does not get to call silence a virtue when silence was only fear wearing a composed expression, does not get to cite patience as a reason when patience became an alibi somewhere around the middle of last year. That person has to live without those stories, and that is genuinely frightening. It is supposed to be, The hammer does not ask if you are ready. Readiness is not the currency the forge accepts. The only currency the anvil recognizes is honesty, the raw, unedited kind that does not wait for the right moment because it understands that the right moment is constructed, not discovered. This moment was constructed over months, over degrees and ancient calendars, and a sequence of celestial events that assembled itself with a precision that has no living precedent. That work was done long before you arrived here. Now the forge is hot, the metal is ready, and the only remaining variable is you. If what you heard today landed in the place it was meant to reach, write it below. Not the version that sounds acceptable. The one that changed your breathing when it surfaced. The one that has been waiting the longest. Your mark on the anvil becomes a witness for the next person who reads it and finally finds the nerve to make their own. The universe has spoken. What comes next is in your hands.